Max Rockatansky, also sometimes known as Mad Max, the man with no name, Bloodbag, Fool, and just an endless list of derogatory nicknames. It really just keeps going. Max is on a mythological journey to nowhere, but he keeps getting delayed by an endless amount of side quests that help him become a real human being and help him overcome his severe attachment issues. It's never specified how old Max exactly is. It's assumed that his age is 12,045 days. But recently I learned that Mel Gibson was only 23 years old during the filming of the first movie. So let's just go ahead and assume that Max was 23 when the first movie was happening. And I know that I made the bold assumption that Max was 25 in my previous video and assumed that like Max was at least 25 during the events of the first movie. And I understand that that makes my channel lose all credibility, and that I can't show my face in public. So in 1982, at the young age of 23, Max served on the MFP, or Main Force Patrol, commonly referred to as the Bronze. I don't know why they're called the Bronze. A big reason they must be referred to as the Bronze is probably because of the bronze badges located right here on their uniforms. But who's to say? The MFP was the last hope for society, as they would help the police keep the roads and highways safe. And this was made difficult to do when the evil biker gangs began to rise and the rest of the world began to fall. Max was special, mainly because he was the top pursuit man. He was an incredibly skilled driver and was apparently very ruthless, which is why upon seeing Max pursue him, the Knight Rider goes from this very chauvinistic, arrogant, deluded crime committer who thinks he's invincible to a sobbing coward who wishes to not have crimed anymore. Other than his no mercy approach of dealing with criminals, Max was a pretty normal guy. He loved his wife Jessie and his son Sprong. He likes these people so much that he wants to get out of the game, to quit the road for good. Because Max started developing feelings, not for his family, like a different kind of feelings. Like bad feelings. Feelings of loving that chase and hunting down criminals. Max fears that if he's out there on the road any longer, he's gonna become one of them. A terminal crazy. So his commanding officer, Fifi McAfee, yep, that is his actual name, Fifi McAfee had to bribe Max with candy.
Our top pursuit man wants to quit the road and we have to seduce him with candy.
Candy isn't offering Max some paid vacations to spend with his family or doing stuff like begging Commissioner Labatush, real human being, for additional funds in order to acquire new vehicles, like Max's new 74 XB Ford Falcon Coupe, a car that would end up becoming Max's home, as well as this link between the myths. McAfee is giving specialists like Max a bunch of candy, so Max stays out there on the road fighting to keep the highways safe. And Commissioner Labatush also understands the severity of this and the importance of keeping Max out there, as he's leaving McAfee's office defending himself with a broomstick and a fencing mask, implying that their society might not be safe. Apparently the story that Goose was telling his friend about when they were sitting there in Fat Nancy's cafe.
He leaves his feet, goes through the windscreen, head first straight into the tree, right? And then bounces back through the windscreen. By the time we got to him, he was just sitting there trying to scream with his face ripped off.
You remember that really bright, optimistic story? Well, Goose was supposedly describing the end of Max's previous partner, and the ending of his previous partner was pushing him closer to the edge. And then when Max saw a cooked goose, that definitely pushed him really close to that edge. But Toe Cutter taking out Max's wife and kid is really what shoved him over the edge. Like Johnny the Boy, Max wasn't wanting to cross that line. However, Max later commits the same crime that Johnny the Boy was forced to commit by tethering him to a car and then setting the car on fire. When Max was walking away, Johnny the Boy claims, "You're mad, man," as Max has gone mad. Hence the title, Mad Max. On that dour note, I think it's a good time to talk about today's sponsor, BetterHelp, as they're helping make this video and these very insightful takes possible. Explaining things is what I do for a living, apparently. So let me explain what BetterHelp is. BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service that is 100% online, like how it's on my phone right now. And they're doing this online thing because they're trying to make therapy more affordable and accessible. And if we're talking accessibility, you can talk to your therapist over text, chat, video call, voice call, whatever you feel comfortable with. And if that sounds pretty neat, all you have to do to get started is fill out this questionnaire, answering what your needs and preferences in therapy would be. And after you do that, they're gonna look in their network of over 30,000 licensed and experienced therapists, and then they're gonna pick the most compatible one for you, giving you your own personalized therapist. And then once you're matched, you can contact your therapist literally whenever, like 24/7. But if you're unlike me and you want to be more organized, you can actually schedule live sessions whenever it's convenient for you. And let's say hypothetically you're feeling that your therapist just may not be the right fit. It's really just not going to be a problem because you can switch to a new therapist at no additional charge. It will literally cost you nothing to switch. So at the end of the day, using BetterHelp, you're getting more flexibility and you're getting a more affordable price. So if you want to begin that journey with BetterHelp, all you have to do is click on this link in the description below, the one that contains my name. And if you click on it, BetterHelp is going to give you 10% off your first month. So go check it out for yourself. Now let's get back to the guy on a never-ending side quest. I can't stop thinking about McAfee telling Max this.
They say people don't believe in heroes anymore. They're gonna give them back to heroes.
Max feared that he would become a terminal crazy, and it looked like by the end of the first Mad Max, he sunk down to their level and went on a rampage and then disappeared into the night. But you know what? I feel like he never conforms to one side or the other. He's always riding the line between being a real hero and being one of them, as in being one of the bad guys. Max went rogue, along with other patrol officers, because like most things, the MFP ended when the world did. After the events of Mad Max 1, Max had to become a nomad who lives out of his car and eats dog food. Just living the life. He's forced to become a more proficient mechanic and somehow gains superhuman strength. But I'm not gonna get into that right now. Max only cares about himself and his dog. But then out of nowhere, the Road Warrior encounters the Ayatollah of Rock and Rolla. And I'm just gonna say it. Max and the Rock and Rolla of Ayatollah. Max and Humongous have a lot in common. They're both still suffering from injuries from the pre-fall world. He with his burns, and Max is still recovering from a showdown with Toe Cutter, which is why Max has a leg brace from his leg getting shot, and why he's missing a jacket sleeve from his arm getting run over. Well, I guess that's more of an injury to his jacket than anything else. Speaking of that jacket, apparently during the pre-production of Fury Road, they were trying to develop Max's look for the new film. Storyboard artist Peter Pound rediscovered Max's leather jacket in the Kennedy Miller Mitchell building, somewhere in Australia. Pound went on to say that there were renovations being done to the building, and the storyboard artists were down in the basement where they stored a lot of the old props. I found the Mad Max jacket on the dirt with green mold growing on it. I couldn't believe it. We managed to save it, and that was the one they used as a base or a pattern to make the new jacket. So even though the new jacket in Fury Road is a completely different jacket than the one that was growing green mold, a part of the OG jacket still exists within the new one. We know that Jim the Goose from the first Mad Max suffered from these severe burns. And we also know that Humongous suffered from similar burns. We definitely know that they decided to scrap the idea of Humongous being Goose, even though it would have been a really cool thing to add to the plot and would have made a lot of sense dramaturgically. Let me elaborate on this. So even though they scrapped that idea, they still left in hints that Humongous could have been Goose, like the Marauders using Main Force Patrol uniforms and vehicles. In theory, the Marauders could have killed Main Force Patrol and military members and stole their uniforms, but I don't think that was the case. Like Immortan Joe, Humongous has a military background, and Immortan Joe's crew was made up of people who served in the military with him. So my theory is that Humongous's crew was made up of people who served in the military as well, and some of these military people must have definitely served in the Main Force Patrol. After the fall, officers like Roop and Charlie, not saying Roop and Charlie, but officers like them, must have turned into Marauders. And I'm actually just gonna pause the video right there because I completely missed this one moment in the Mad Max Fury Road comic where Roop and Charlie are seen as part of Immortan Joe's army. In fact, while they're committing atrocities and doing all this slaughtering, this epic duo were the ones to spot and capture the People Eater, back before the People Eater showed Immortan Joe the Citadel, and in return became ruler of Gastown. As the world turned into survival of the fittest, though only ones who could survive were the ones equipped with certain skill sets and tools. So in Road Warrior, Max is going up against a gang that represents his own downfall and loss of humanity. These other Main Force Patrol and military officers were sworn in to protect their citizens, but they turned their back on them. Max and these other officers became the very thing that they were supposed to protect the people from. By the way, for those who watched my most recent video analyzing the complete prime real estate locations of the Wasteland, I apologize for sounding a little bit redundant in this next part, but don't worry, I'm going to be building upon some pre-established stuff here, so stick with me. And beyond Thunderdome, Max comes across the Lost Tribe, a bunch of kids who reside in the middle of an oasis in the desert after their stupid parents left to go on the dumbest journey of all time. The kids want to follow in their parents' footsteps and go back to Tomorrowland, but Max refuses to help them out at first. And this is because Max isn't a good person, but he's also not a bad person. I don't know. He just kind of represses the good person within him. In an interview from 1985, George Miller went on to talk about Mel Gibson talking about Max. How Mel viewed Max as a closet human being. He's someone who denies his humanity, and sometimes it's going to come out, somehow. So I think he's sort of a pretty sad figure from that point of view, and yet you have a sense that he's wise enough to learn. He finally learns, slowly, that you can't live by yourself. You're part of a community, like it or not. That we're all sort of vaguely responsible for each other, and there are purposes outside of an individual's life or existence. I think Max somehow understands that, and it probably makes him more compassionate at the end of Mad Max 3, at least. That might be the difference. Maybe he has compassion ultimately, in spite of doing all these sort of fairly brutal things. Throughout the saga, music tends to be a reminder of one's humanity. In the calm before the storm, Max's wife plays the saxophone. And then later in Auntie's Fortress, this random guy also plays the saxophone, jogging Max's memory of his wife who's no longer operating like a living person. And because of that, I feel like music is a constant reminder of this meaning beyond that individualistic frame of mind, as Max will do stuff like giving the music box to the feral child, or playing the vinyl record for the children of the lost tribe. I know the vinyl wasn't exactly music, but you get the point that I'm trying to make here. Max bringing this music to other people is a key indicator that Max is different from the other wastelanders that he despises. Just to add some contrast, Toast the Knowing plays with a music box because she must have taken it from Amore and Joe's penthouse, a place where Joe has a piano and sheet music and other musical stuff. All of this locked away behind a vault. Joe is someone who denies the wastelanders their humanity, but Max is someone who shares it with them. George Miller's belief around the time of Thunderdome was that heroes are agents of evolution, the means by which one world is shattered and a new one is created. They're not for their own sake, their purpose. Like Mad Max at the end of Mad Max 3. Once the kids are free, they're going to go off and start something new, and he can't be part of that. He's too fixed in his ways. At least that's his function. He recognizes that he's not so important. Just a chance of renewal is much more important than an individual. Before the events of Fury Road, Furiosa, also known as Bag of Nails, because that was her nickname, Bag of Nails. Bag of Nails was brought in to protect the Five Wives against Rictus, because Rictus was, well, to put it frankly, Rictus was a scumbag. And then Capable comes over and looks Furiosa directly in the face and poses the question, if you're supposed to be protecting us, why don't you protect us from him? Not referring to Rictus, but referring to Amore and Joe, the ultimate scumbag. His way of going about procreation would make many other people stray away from that and just subscribe to antinatalism, the definition of this very niche pessimistic philosophy for those who don't know. Capable's words sparked a change within Furiosa. You know what, come to think of it, Capable was pretty capable of convincing people to turn against Joe. Furiosa and Max are basically the same person, as they make the perfect anti-hero duo, starting with their pessimistic viewpoints on life and their no room for attachment mindset. But no matter how bad they get hurt, they still choose to do the right thing at the end of the day. Also, they both have ingenious ways of preventing their vehicles from being stolen. Furiosa has kill switches on the war rig, making the engine stall out if she doesn't operate the vehicle herself, while Max chooses a more intense form of going about that by just planting explosives under the vehicle. They both have the steering wheel with the skull and flames branded. Actually, wait a second. Max doesn't have that. He avoided getting that at like the last second, except the one thing that he didn't avoid was getting the tattoos covering his entire back. Let's take a moment to talk about the tattoos that Max is gonna have for the rest of the franchise. It's assumed that his age is 12,045 days, or 33 years. By the way, it's been 7,000 days, or 19 years, since Furiosa last saw the Vuvolini, or the Green Place, a place where she was taken as a child. And let's assume that she was around like 10 years old when she was taken. That means during the time of Fury Road, she's closer to the age of late 20s, early 30s, meaning her and Max are around the same age. Or maybe not, I don't know. I'm just trying my best to piece together a cohesive timeline, but Miller is not making it easy on me, especially with him saying that 45 years after the collapse, Furiosa was taken from the Green Place, even though Fury Road is supposed to take place 20 years after the collapse. So you know what? There may be some things in the Mad Max universe that I can't explain, like how I can't explain this account that followed me on Letterboxd named Bryce Frown, and how their 4 favorite films are Ford v Ferrari, Ford v Ferrari, Ford v Ferrari, and Ford v Ferrari, and how they inexplicably rated every single film on the planet besides Ford v Ferrari and Herbie Fully Loaded half a star because they're not Ford v Ferrari. Anyway, back to judging Max's health chart. His height is around 10 hands. because they're using hands instead of feet now. His weight is around 180 pounds. No busted limbs, so he came out of this car crash pretty unscathed. And I guess he recovered from all the injuries brought to him by Toe Cutter's gang. He has a good immune system. He's O positive for blood type. No gasoline or supplies because they were taken from him by the buzzards. We're gonna learn more about that in a second. He's a lone wolf, and apparently there's a note to keep him muzzled. Did you guys also notice that Max was more like an animal at the beginning of Fury Road? But before we touch on that, I think it's important to talk about something that happened before Furiosa turned left. In the early 2000s, between the events of Thunderdome and Fury Road, Max competed in Gastown's Thunderdome, because Gastown also has a Thunderdome. But if we're using the vernacular of the buzzards, they refer to it as Thunderdome. It's pretty cute. Max competed in a group consisting of scavengers, warriors, workers, slaves, and one buzzard. All of these quote-unquote sheep were competing for a Boss 351 Cleveland V8 engine, the thing that the war boys like worship. What you have to know is that when the match started, all the sheeple were taken out besides the buzzard and Max. Before Max received the tail end of a chainsaw to his back, a mysterious woman handed him a flare. Max ends up lighting the flare and sticking it into the buzzard's eye, giving him a solid moment to remove the buzzard's helmet and then going for the kill. The buzzard's brother did not take it so well. He claims that Max had outside help because he had a weapon handed to him, thus giving Max an unfair advantage. But I'm over here looking at the buzzard's sacred armor that they supposedly brought into the arena out of respect for their competitors. A sacred kind of armor that is covered in like 1,000 rusty spikes. And the buzzard's brother's main argument was that you're not allowed to bring weapons into the dome. But I'm over here looking at his armor going like, my guy. Thankfully, the buzzard's brother was removed from the audience for shouting this nonsense, but unthankfully, he had an all-encompassing vendetta against Max due to the whole annihilating his brother thing. Before Max could even get his prize, as in the engine, back into the interceptor, he was attacked by the buzzard's brother, as well as a bunch of other buzzards. They pulled the whole let's take his car and his supplies, and then leave him in the middle of the desert, alone and bleeding out to die. Thing. The woman who helped him out in the arena tracks him down. I don't know this woman's name exactly, but when Max was bleeding out and everything was going dark, he mistakes this woman for Jessie. So we'll call her Not Jessie. Anyway, Not Jessie saves Max and tells him that she has a daughter named Glory, someone who was taken by the buzzards, because apparently the buzzards are out here ruining everybody's week. This is actually a really tragic story. Glory was surviving in the system of tunnels existing underneath the sand dunes of Sydney, Australia. But wait a second, the Lost Tribe went to Sydney, Australia at the end of Mad Max 3. So why would Tomorrowland or Sydney, Australia be overrun by buzzards? Oh no. Guys, I don't think Savannah, Nix, and the Lost Tribe are doing okay. Anyway, moving on. The buzzards that captured Glory would call her Tunnel Monkey because they would send her into small vents to seek out food, clothing, or whatever other supplies she could find. But Glory found a place to hide away from the buzzards. We'll call this area the safe zone. The safe zone had water and food, but mainly dog food. Like the same kind of dog food that Max and the Gyro Captain were eating during their best friend's stakeout. Max was able to locate Glory, and upon their escape, Max busts open a door into the buzzard's parking garage, a place where they maintain and store their vehicles. This is where Max recovers his stolen interceptor that they've already started covering with rusty spikes. They both get in the car and then get the heck out of there, and Max is able to reunite this mother-daughter duo. Not Jessie recognizes that Max is a man of honor and that he's someone who's actually willing to pay his debts, so she offers him a place with her and her daughter, giving Max a family, a purpose. He finally has an opportunity not to be alone again. But Max, being a hollow shell of a man, goes like, nah, I'm good. Then as they're going their separate ways, the buzzard's brother comes back into town and then just completely pulverizes Not Jessie and Glory. Max and the buzzard's brother face off in the most not chill game of chicken ever, resulting in the very justified death of the buzzard. But here's where the story really gets sad. In her last moments, severely injured Glory asks Max if her mother's okay. She was not okay. In fact, she was dead, which according to my research is the opposite of being okay. But before Glory entered the afterlife, Max lied and assured her that her mother was indeed okay and that he would keep her safe. This is why we see Max having these very intense flashbacks throughout Fury Road. It's not Max's deceased wife or son. Instead, it's Glory and Not Jessie. Starting the moment we saw Max at Gastown's Thunderdome, Max had been exhibiting some animalistic traits, like immediately bashing a competitor's face into the ground before the match even started to establish to all the other competitors that he's a threat. And at the beginning of Fury Road, Max is treated like a wild animal on the loose. When he's captured by the War Boys, he's caged and muzzled like a wild animal. Slit even refers to him as a raging feral.
It's got a muzzle on it! It's a raging feral!
But when Max strays away from the whole self-preservation and begins to help Furiosa and the 5 wives, he slowly regains his voice and the muzzle is removed. And at that point, Dag even claims that Max is no longer insane. I feel like we should take a moment to talk about a certain place. A place that I didn't get to talk about in my video analyzing the prime real estate of the wasteland. And that place would be the Plains of Silence. A lot of Fury Road was shot in Namibia, Africa, because George Miller wanted the cars to drive ridiculously fast during the chase scenes, something he was unable to achieve while filming in the Moon Plains or the Gibber Plains in Australia. Because in the outback, if your vehicle is moving more than 40 kilometers per hour, you're going to have small rocks flying up at you, which is not ideal when you're trying to film. It's also not ideal when you're being a person. So in Fury Road, instead of getting this kind of desert, you get this kind of desert. It's a place where you don't even hear birds chirping, or any bird noises for that matter. It's even more in the middle of nowhere than the outback, and some of the crew described it as something like being on the moon. I actually kind of like the change of scenery. This desert in Namibia kind of makes the Plains of Silence look like a dried up ocean bed. The Plains of Silence is a place that Max was contemplating driving into at the beginning of Fury Road. It's a place that Furiosa wanted to take the wives in the Vuvalini in search of another green place. It's rumored that people have trekked across the Plains of Silence, but as the eerie name implies, no one has ever come back. When it comes to Max, screenwriter Nick Lathoris thinks that the plains represent a self-destructive wish to end it all. Max wants peace. He wants to quiet the voices in his head. So the Plains of Silence didn't make my wasteland location video because it's more of a metaphorical place to better help represent Max and Furiosa running away from their problems. At the beginning of Fury Road, Max is driving away from his past, something that he's been prone to do ever since he went rogue in the first movie and drove into the outback. And when standing in the same spot for a second time, he's watching Furiosa and friends make the same mistake that he's made over and over again, forcing him to intervene and get them to turn around, convincing Furiosa that the green place she was in search for this entire time was behind her. She just has to get rid of Joe. At the beginning of Fury Road, Max is confronted by some of the people he tried to save, but couldn't. We have this guy and the people we previously talked about, like Not Jesse and Glory, all people that he's been running from, metaphorically and literally. But later on, Max experiences another hallucination with Glory, and it convinces him to tell Furiosa and friends to turn around. And during this hallucination, a man in a hockey mask appears, and this man kind of resembles Humongous, except this guy returns later in the film and stabs Furiosa in the side, causing her to bleed out. In order to save her, Max becomes a willing blood bag this time and donates his blood in the most unsanitary way possible. Max is able to revive Furiosa, thus breaking the cycle of losing people on his watch. And during this exchange, Max says his name.
Max. My name is Max.
This right here, this moment, when Max says his name, he's leaving behind any traces of being an animal, and he becomes fully human again. Writer Brendan McCarthy went on to say that in Fury Road, Max has a very slow burn. He comes up very reluctantly.
So we wait.
Into this engagement with the girls and this warrior woman, until the point where he's committed, and the film pivots on that commitment as they go back in the beginning of the third act to take the Citadel. So we had this idea of rather than running away, why not change where you're at? We had a little slogan written above the electro board which said engage to heal, which means as you become engaged, healing can happen emotionally and spiritually. And Nick Lathoris adds, the premise of it was that what's broken is healed by love only. According to stunt coordinator Guy Norris, his own duties on set were enormous. Norris went on to elaborate that there has not been a single film that had as much stunt work as Fury Road. They walked a constant tightrope, balancing between getting the footage and action that they've never seen or done before, with the safety of the performers that were actually doing the stunts, because they were doing major stunt sequences every single day for 100+ days shoot. In order to pull off the stunts needed for the shoot, they had to bring on UFC fighters, combat specialists, circus performers, acrobats, and so on. And Tom Hardy did most of the stunt work that was required for the character of Max. And Tom Hardy had an absolute miserable time doing it. Tom Hardy would later go on to apologize for being so, quote-unquote, myopic. At the time, Tom Hardy couldn't really see George Miller's vision. It wasn't until after he saw the final product that he's like, okay, I get it. This is brilliant. According to the cast and crew, Tom wanted justification for every bit of choreography and everything surrounding it. And Charlize Theron was like, okay, can we just do it? Needless to say, the two main leads did not get along. PJ Votan remembers that at some stage, the wives didn't like Tom. And then one day they didn't even disguise it. They were just yelling at each other in front of us, especially when Tom was supposedly showing up to set late, provoking Theron, who at times was waiting in the war rig for hours not being able to film. Nicholas Hoult, who plays this guy, commented on the tense atmosphere, claiming it was kind of like you're on summer holiday and the adults in the front of the car are arguing. Tom and Charlize would either be fighting or completely ignoring each other. Apparently this scene where Max tells Furiosa and the rest of the gang to turn around and head back towards the Citadel, it changed something in Tom's attitude and approach to filming this movie. From that moment, they were able to get back on track. Like, everyone unanimously agreed that something shifted after that scene. The film was shot sequentially, as in they shot the scenes in order. So the timeline of the character arcs lined up with the relationships on set. The moment Furiosa and Max decided to work in harmony is when Hardy and Theron were able to work as a team. And because the movie was shot sequentially, you can sort of feel the tonal shift in the actors after that moment. Later on, Hardy went on to say that, in hindsight, I was in over my head in many ways. The pressure on both of us was overwhelming at times. What she needed was a better, perhaps more experienced partner in me. That's something that can't be faked. I'd like to think now that I'm older and uglier, I could rise to that occasion. I'm getting sidetracked. The entire reason I wanted to talk about Tom Hardy being a grump is so I can talk about the polecats. Oh my leftover watermelon slices. The polecats. These guys right here are called polecats. They were introduced in Fury Road, but it's not the first time we've seen a desert pirate use an acrobatic pole to board a vehicle. In the original Mad Max, this guy, this goober right here, he's using the same kind of pole to board a truck and steal gasoline. Except the polecats are a lot more complicated and they're a lot more dangerous. Brendan McCarthy recalls that one morning George Miller came into his office with a piece of newspaper that had a sketch on it. A sketch of someone using a pole that was mounted to a car in order to board another vehicle that was on either side of that car. And George was like, can you do anything with this? After rigorously testing other materials, they finally decided to land on modified steel for the poles, which I thought was like one of the first materials they would test. There was a counterweight at the bottom of the pole, allowing the transfer of weight, so the polecat could sway back and forth. To be specific, as you extend the distance from bending point to pivot point, it varies the weight. So we were about 4-to-1 by the time we got to 25 feet at the top. If you have to have the driver and the two other guys clambering around the counterweight, they climb up the pole, they get more mechanical advantage. They drop down, they swing. So suddenly there's a lot more action, a lot more involvement, a lot more truth. The polecats' vehicles had a wide wheelbase to prevent them from falling over and doing the whole. And all of this allowed Tom Hardy to perform one of my favorite stunts of all time. And look, I know that they filmed the explosion and the polecatting separately and then just pieced together those two shots in post, but the character of Max still got to be a polecat. Huge shout out to the channel members, also known as the crew members on board USS Bryce. You guys are definitely helping keep this channel afloat, so thank you. And for everyone else, thank you for watching, and let me know if you want to see more Mad Max.